Well, in this particular session, we're going to talk about moral character. We're going to turn the corner a little bit now, and we're going to begin the process of looking at moral character. I guess the best place to start is ask the question, what is character? What is character training? What is moral character? Well, to understand what character is, maybe we should start really by stating what character is not. Character, a child's character, is not his or her temperament. It is not their personality. As you know, we've already discussed it. Temperament is inborn. Personality is learned. Temperament is the foundation we are all born with. Personality is the house that's built on the foundation. What is moral character? Moral character is the quality of craftsmanship that went into building the house. Moral character is the combination of virtues that are engraved on the moral fabric of a person's life. It is the quality of your personality. It's the moral restraint and moral encouragement of your temperament. That's what character is. Again, we all live in a house. Maybe some have a shack, some have a mansion. But moral character is the quality of craftsmanship that went into building the person. And you know the engineers in this process is mom and dad. You guys are the architects. You have every resource available to you. The only thing you need now is the willpower and the understanding of what does the blueprint call for. And the blueprint, of course, is what we derive from Scripture. So when we speak of Christian character, we are referring to moral and social excellence. We're not talking about the mediocrity that's currently found in our society. When we talk about God's high standard, His divine standard, there's not another standard of moral excellence that can compete with this. And that's exactly where your children should be at. That's the goal of raising a morally responsible child. Now, what are the basics of moral character? Well, the quality of your character and the quality of your children's character can be summarized by three words: respect, honor, and honesty. Respect, honor, and honesty. These three words best amplify or amplified by the presence or absence. These are the three attributes that need to be in the life of your children. And by the way, respect, honor, and honesty, these are action words. These are not attitude words. When they're used in Scripture, and as they're applied in Scripture, it means that it's not enough to have an attitude of respect. It's not enough to have an attitude of honor or an attitude of honesty. These have to be demonstratable. There has to be action to it. So they're action words. There is the action of respecting, the action and demonstration of honor, the demonstration of honesty in our life. Now, there are 6 basic relationships which provide the context for all character training in every society. It doesn't matter if you're in a primitive society. It doesn't matter if you're in a complex society. There are 6 basic relationships that are foundational to every society because these 6 relationships are fundamental to every human being. I'm going to give you these 6, and then we're going to begin the process of teaching through the first 2 on our way to covering all 6 of them. Here are the 6. If you want to write them down, please. There is respect for authority. Every human being has authority in their life. There is respect for parents. Obviously, every human being has a set of parents. If nothing more than biological, we still have a set of parents. Then there's respect for elders. Number 4, there's respect for peers, and included in that is siblings. That's the 4th natural relationship. And then there's respect for property and, of course, respect for nature. That's 5 and 6. These are the 6 natural relationships that provide the context for all character training, the context for all character development. And by way of analogy, these 6 relationships can be really viewed as a precious stone, as a precious diamond that sparkles from all 6 sides. And like a diamond, there is a single preciousness, but many sides of appreciation. You have that single preciousness, and these 6 relationships represent the many sides of appreciation for your preciousness. And that's why training in these 6 natural relationships, these 6 natural areas, is absolutely critical. Training in these areas means that we're going to look at the 6 sides of your preciousness. For any one of us, To not appreciate one side means we're going to ultimately devalue the whole diamond, the whole person. So parents who hope to raise a morally responsible child must become cognitive of these 6 relationships. And let's look at the very first one. It's respect for authority. This is probably the easiest of them all because it's so obvious. There are a number of different authority people in our life. Pastors are in a position of authority, teachers, police officers, even referees in the middle of a ball game. These people are authorities in our life to some extent. You know, we have authority all around us. There's God's authority, biblical authority, of course. There's parental authority, church authority. There's national, federal government authority, state authority, county authority, legislative authority, administrative authority. There's authority. We do not lack for authority in our lives. But authority is not a foreign concept in Scripture. In Hebrews 13:17, it says, "Obey your leaders and submit to them." Romans 13:1, "Let every person be in subjection to the governing authorities, for there is no authority except from God, and those which exist are established by God." 1 Peter 2:13 through 14, "Submit yourselves for the Lord's sake to every human institution, whether to a king as one authority or to governors as sent by him." And then in 1 Peter 2:17, he says, "Honor all men, love the brotherhood, fear God, honor the king." Honor the king. Now, let me qualify all of this. These verses speak and relate to a believer's response, the Christian's response to authority, but not authority's responsibility back to its constituents. I want you to understand that I know that. I make that distinction because all authority is governed by biblical imperatives. That means biblical authority has moral limits. It is limited by biblical law and limited by moral precepts derived from the Scriptures. You see, man cannot alter God's moral law. If he does, he is no longer representing biblical authority. Biblical authority, whether parental or church or governmental, must be exercised within the framework and within the context of biblical ethics if it is to be blessed by God. So we're not going to be talking about authority's response to us. We're only going to talk about our response to authority, our relationship with authority, and the relationship your children will have with authority. Well, let's begin by defining what is authority. Authority is not the law. Authority is not the law, but the power to enforce the law. That's the difference. Authority does not mean treating everyone equal, but treating everyone with equity. Authority must be understood as fair play. That's probably the simplest definition, but the most accurate definition in terms of our practical outworking of this principle. You see, for me to submit to authority is to honor you, because submitting to authority is my agreement to play by the rules so that I do not violate your preciousness and your right to enjoy life. I am going to submit myself to authority. I'm going to submit myself to the rules for that reason. You have to understand that authority is not man's enemy. Authority is man's friend. It is given to restrain the anti-authority side of our humanity. It's given to protect fair play. That's why God has put people in positions of authority. Now let me give you an example of how submitting to authority and playing by the rules is a way of demonstrating honor on you, because that's what we're talking about. When we talk about respecting authority, we're talking about placing honor on authority. We're talking about respecting authority, living honestly in light of authority. So, acknowledging your preciousness and right to enjoy life is part of authority. You know, in many parks around, and certainly in some of our parks here in Los Angeles, when you walk into the front of the park, you will notice a sign that will tell you what you can and cannot do. And in some of the parks, you will see a leash code, or leash law code, which means the dogs that are in this park, if you're going to take a dog for a walk, that dog needs to be on a leash. Now, there are some good reasons why that dog needs to be on a leash. I could think of some very practical ones. Number one, if I'm having a picnic, the last thing I want is your great big dog running up and chasing my children or running after my hot dog or hamburger and grabbing and taking it off the plate. I mean, that's one thing, just to frighten children. That's a good reason, if it's the type of park where everyone is taking their holiday in. Another reason is rather obvious. You don't want to go on a picnic and put your blanket down someplace and then realize a few minutes later that there's a unpleasant scent around. So there's a responsibility here, and that's what that law is for. On that sign often there is the city code, and next to the city code there is a fine. $150, $200, whatever it is, there's a fine for not having your dog on the leash. When I take my dog Poochie for a walk in the park, and that sign is there, Poochie does not run loose. There's a reason for that. And it's a simple reason. Because I respect your right to enjoy life. You are so precious, according to God's standard, that I'm going to honor you by submitting myself to this rule, submitting myself to the authority. And I'm doing it not out of the fear of the $500 fine or the $300 fine or whatever the fine may be. I'm doing it as a Christian because you are precious. You see, I have to be concerned for the person coming behind me. I have to be concerned about the people in front of me. I have to be concerned with the people on my side. The whole motivation for the Christian to do right is because it's the love of virtue. I mean, if you are still doing right because you say, well, I'm going to keep my dog on the leash because I don't want to get caught, I don't want to pay that fine, you have missed the point. You have missed the moral point. That sign is for the godless. That fine is for the godless. That fine is not for the Christian, because the Christian does not need or should not need extrinsic motivation to do right, because the intrinsic motivation should be in the heart. That's why respecting authority, that's a simple way, and you can multiply that scene many times over in many different situations. How do you respond to those of authority who are over you? Now listen, please. How we respond to positions of authority is the pattern our children will follow. Think that through. I mean, if you're walking into the park and your children read the sign, and you read the sign, and then you take the leash off and say, go on, boy, go run. What are you saying to your children? What kind of example is that? You see, our submission to authority is more than an act of outward compliance. It's the attitude of accepting in this moment by divine appointment this person or this rule is over me. Do you undo all your training by your actions? When the sign says keep off the grass, do you walk on it? When there's a notice that comes home from school from the teacher, and maybe it's a critical notice, do you start to grumble and complain in front of the child about the teacher? If you do, you're wrong, because you're undermining in the mind of your child the significance of authority. We never criticize a teacher in front of our children, especially a teacher who's bringing a note home. If there's a problem, you go to the teacher first and you go to them privately. You see, this is the standard that Christians need to come to. I'm not going to undermine what I'm trying to teach my children by my actions, which sometimes I'm not going to try to do that, although we do. And I remember doing this once with my daughter Amy when she was learning to drive. I put her in the car on a Sunday morning because on Sunday morning in Los Angeles, that's probably the safest time to let anyone learn how to drive. No one's on the streets. And one Sunday morning, I said, Amy, today you're driving. And Anne-Marie and Jennifer got in the back seat, and I sat in front with Amy, and we took off. And Amy started driving. She held to 35 miles an hour, like a good little new driver. And so, we're a ways away from the church, and she's holding to 35 miles an hour, and it was getting a little bit boring. So I said, Amy, how about going a little bit faster so we can get to church? And so Amy stood there with 35 miles an hour, and I waited patiently, and then finally I said, Amy, come on, get on with it. I want you to have the thrill of speed. Let's go a little bit faster. And Amy rightly turned to me and said, Daddy, do you see that sign over there? It says 35 miles an hour. For me to obey you would be to actually disobey God, because ultimately He's the one who put the sign there. Rightly rebuked. That's a simple thing. But we do undermine respect for authority. And yet the Scriptures speak over and over and over again about our responsibility back to authority. See, how we respond to positions of authority as parents sets the acceptable parameters for our children. If we are constantly living below the standard, they will interpret our behavior as the standard. And when they interpret that to be the standard, then what do you say to them when they do not want to respond to your authority? So submitting ourselves to authority is fundamental. That's the first side of appreciation. I submit myself to authority, not because of fines, not because of rules. When we talk about the driving down the road and the littering signs that are out there, I do not keep my paper in the car because I'm afraid of the sign. I keep my paper in the car, my trash in the car until I get to a place I can drop it off appropriately. Because of you. That's the bottom line. It's your preciousness. And again, you are coming behind me, and I want you to enjoy life. I want you to enjoy the roadway. I want it to be free, as at least not be responsible for cluttering it. You are precious. That is the whole theme of biblical ethics. That's the mandate. I am responding to that preciousness, and that's exactly where you need to be bringing your children to. They have to have in their heart, on that slate that you write, that sensitivity to others and know how to respond appropriately. Well, let's move to a very important relationship. Number 2, respect for parents. And this is where we're going to end tonight too. There's so much to be said here, and I'll never get it all in, but let me get started. I really want to start out on a negative note. I wish to begin talking about respect for parents by accusing many of you of underestimating the importance of the 5th commandment given to Moses at Sinai. It is a simple statement. It says, honor your father and mother, that your days may be prolonged in the land which the Lord your God will give you. Exodus 20:12. That's the 5th commandment. Actually, the 5th commandment is more closely associated with the first 4, which deals with man's relationship to God, than it is with the last 5, which deals with man's relationship to man. It is a simple commandment, and maybe because it's so simple, that is the reason why so many parents are lax in not understanding the significance, the profundity of this statement. Children, honor your father and your mother. The commandment, honor your father and mother, is so special that it has a promise attached to it, and consequently, it is so special that the dishonoring of parents has a special curse attached to it. I mean, God really takes this very seriously because you are the mediator to your child. You stand between the child and God. And He wants you to understand that you need to communicate to your child how important this honoring issue is. I mean, there are consequences. Let me give you some verses that will reveal this to you. Proverbs 30:17. The eye that mocks a father and scorns a mother. The ravens of the valley will pick it out, and the young eagle will eat it. You know, the eye. You have all seen the look. You know what that look is? That's the eye. You know when you're talking to the child and the child throws their eye. You know what that is? You know what God? That's what He's talking about here. He's not talking about the arm. He's not talking about the leg. He's not figuratively talking. He's talking about the eye. The eye that scorns. Not the tongue that scorns. I mean, there's plenty of verses that deals with the tongue. It's the eye that scorns. It's not the hand that slaps or hits. We've got other verses for that. It's the eye. So when that happens, and it will happen because of the natures of our children, what do? I mean, what does that mean to you? I know it bothers you. And I know you want to get back at your child, maybe. But is it to help the child, correct the child? No, the eye. And that's why the dishonoring of parents, God He takes it so seriously. In Exodus 21:15 and verse 17, He says, he who strikes his mother and father shall surely be put to death. And then He said, if that's not bad enough, He says, he who curses his mother and father shall surely be put to death. Well, aren't you glad that we now live under grace and not under the law? The fact is, though, God hasn't changed in terms of His high view of your lofty position as parents. Do not let your children make a mockery of your lofty position. Let me ask you this question. As a parent, are you actively or passively raising a child that mocks you or curses you? How shameful it is to hear a child call his parents by their first name, their given name, as if they were some kind of peer. And parents sometimes think this is cute, and it's not cute. Of all the men in the world, there's only one man that I could call my daddy, and all the women in the world, there's only one woman I can call mommy. That's a term of endearment. We're going to talk more about that next week. It's a shame that this happens. How shameful it is to hear a child, and we hear it all the time, to hear a child demand of mommy or daddy, I want it now, mommy, and then mommy runs over and gives it to him now. That's a shame. You are lowering in the mind of the child the lofty position that you have as the mother and father, the position that God says, honor, honor. It's a shame to hear a child speak harshly of a parent. And this really gets into some of the older children as they begin to talk to some of their friends. It's a shame to hear what they say. Parental authority must be respected if you are to rightly train the child. You have a lofty position. Don't wait till you think your child's going to catch up to the point that he'll understand. From the beginning, when they're little, you start putting into the heart and the mind of the child your lofty positions by things you do. You see, you cannot start out by sacrificing your authority in the early years without seriously compromising control in the later years. Because if you do not control the child, you cannot train the child. And folks, no one else can train the child. Please do not burden society with your out-of-control child because you chose not to exercise properly your authority over them. Now the question is this. How can a child best honor his parents? How can a child best respect his parents? Now understand that honor will always remain constant, but the vehicle of honoring will change. The first vehicle of honor comes when children are little, and the vehicle is called obedience. Obedience. Now we're going to develop in later sessions a full understanding of the practical side of obedience, what is required, how to bring a child to the point of first-time obedience. But in this session, I want to introduce the concept of obedience. Obedience is the first vehicle that a child will come to in terms of honoring mom and dad. But that obedience must give way then to a second vehicle. And that second vehicle is called submission. Submission. You see, in parenting, when we talk about the words obedience, we must also, the word obedience, in parenting, when we talk about the word obedience, we must also talk about the word submission because they are relevant to parenting. In the Greek text, the word obedient comes from the Greek word hupakuo. Hupa means to line up under. Kuo carries the idea of a mandate. It's a duty. Soldiers are to obey their masters, or soldiers are to obey their captains. Servants are to obey their masters. Children are to obey their parents. It's a mandate. It's not an option. It's sort of more of an obligation. It's not a matter of choice. It's just a matter of duty. You are to do this. That's hupakuo. But in contrast, the second word is hupatasso. Hupa, again, to line up under, but tasso. The difference is devotion. Where hupakuo is line up under by duty, hupatasso line up under by devotion or out of devotion. It's a type of responsibility. It's the willingness. Wives are not called to hupakuo. Wives are called to hupatasso, to line up under it, submission or subjection. Totally different concepts, especially in parenting. Let's look at the first one, dealing with obedience. What is obedience? Please think of obedience as a type of schoolmaster in the life of a child. Galatians 3:24, we read about the law was a schoolmaster, was a teacher that would eventually bring us to Christ. There was reflection of holiness and perfection in the law, and that law was the schoolmaster that ultimately would bring us to Christ. Well, obedience is like that. Obedience is the schoolmaster. Obedience is the teacher that ultimately brings us to freedom. The freedom that comes with self-control. You see, obedience forces structure on the child. It forces structure on the child. It is an outward structure because the child has no inner moral capacity to govern himself. Parental direction is absolutely necessary. You see, your children will not automatically obey you. They will not automatically respect you. They will not automatically honor you. These activities run contrary to their natures. They must receive training and guidance from you. They need to understand your lofty position. They need to understand that reality. What then is the purpose of obedience? What is the purpose of obedience? It is to be here's the operative word, a temporary teacher. Obedience is temporary. Having a child come to obedience to his parents is supposed to be temporary. It's not lifelong. It's not through the whole parenting process. It's a temporary teacher that brings the child to compliance by extrinsic means until the child is morally ready to comply with intrinsic control. Let me say it again so you're jotting it down, you get it all. Obedience is the temporary teacher that brings the child to compliance by extrinsic means. In other words, means outside of the child. Extrinsic means until the child is morally ready to comply with intrinsic control. In other words, the controls to do right are on the inside. These intrinsic controls are progressive. When my granddaughter was 18 months old, she had certain self-controls. In fact, when she was 10 months old, like many of your children, they had certain self-controls, even at these early ages. And at 18 months, she had a little more self-control. And hopefully at 3, she'll have more self-control. And at 5, she'll have more self-control. You see, the self-control is progressive. At 18 months, because she has some self-control, does not mean she's ready for life. She's not. But the process of self-control training starts very, very early. I mean, shame on parents who do not begin the process of self-control training early. I mean, what are you doing to your child? My goodness, you're going to have your child turn themselves over to the passions. See, requiring obedience is what establishes a learning structure in the heart of the child to which then we begin to fill it with moral truth. First, in training, and we really believe that much of this takes place in the first year, structure first, then we have moral training that goes in the structure, and then after moral training, because in moral training you have all the self-controls, all the self-disciplines, after moral training, then you build on that with academic training. Under a secular model, what is believed is academic training first, and then eventually move to moral training, and then moral training eventually will show itself out in some type of structure. No. We are not here to facilitate the child. We are here to teach the child. So when the child's ready to learn, we do not facilitate. When the child's ready to learn, we teach. That's our job. The structure is what provides the external self-control until the child gains the internal self-control. Without self-control, the child will be in bondage to his passions. You know, I don't know if I've shared it with you guys before, but when you look at a child's born, with 3 marks against him. Number 1, he's born naked, he's born ignorant, and he's born without self-control. Our job as parents, we are to clothe them, we are to educate them, and we are to instill self-control into their life. Why? Because they have no self-control. You see, in a child's life, we are their self-control. Absolutely. They have none, we are. And we begin the process of transferring the self-control from mommy and daddy based upon our moral understanding of what's right and wrong. And we communicate that, and we begin the process of transferring the self-control to the child. And it takes time, and it takes loyalty, and it takes training, and it takes a trusting relationship, and it takes a right relationship between mommy and daddy. It takes everything we've talked about up to this point. We are their self-control. But we must transfer it. We must transfer it to the child. And that's why it's so important for you parents to understand the difference between obedience and submission, because submission comes in the process of transferring the self-control. Obedience in time must be exchanged for submission. Let me explain this. Submitting to parents is doing what is right out of devotion to the parents. It's not the duty. It's not the mandate, as obedience is. Total submission, true biblical submission, is the willingness to line up under. That is, it's to bring your child, to have them come to the point of lining up under your authority. Submission will come when a child begins to accept God as his ultimate authority. See, that's the whole process. You want to bring your child as quickly as you can to understand that God is the ultimate authority in their life. And when they're able then to transfer from your authority to God's authority, ultimately what they end up doing in obedience to God, they end up submitting to you. You see, this is exactly what Jesus did. In Luke 2:41 through 52, we have the beautiful story of, well, not so beautiful for Mary at the time. When Jesus was lost, it was a Passover, and they went down to Jerusalem, and Joseph and Mary went down. And of course, when they would do that historically, you would go down not just as a couple or as a family. The city would go down. They left where they were living, and it was a 2-walk journey, and you brought your own animal for sacrifice. And remember, servants would go, so it was quite a few people who would go. And when Passover is done, because you would only go down to Jerusalem once a year, the women and the children would all start back to their city. So they would have a 1 or 2 day advance start. The men would do their business in town, in Jerusalem, and then begin walking faster and eventually catch up. Well, the scene takes place that when Joseph finally caught up to Mary and everyone that was in front of them, they greeted, they must have kissed. How are the children? By the way, where's Jesus, Mary? And Mary said, well, I thought he was with you. And Joseph says, no, I thought he was with you. And they rushed back to Jerusalem looking for him. And of course, where did they find him? He's 12 years old in this story. He is now in the temple. It was customary that when a child turned 13, he would become one of the sons of the law. Even the custom today of bar mitzvah speaks to this. That is, the child then would put himself under the law. Jesus is 12 years old, and it was customary for the 12-year-olds to be in the temple, asking questions and listening, getting ready to become part of God's family, putting themselves under God. Finally, when Mary did find Jesus in the temple and she spoke to him, the text says in verse 51, and Jesus continued in submission or subjection, in hupatasso, to his parents. You see, he had come to the point in his life where he's putting himself under the law of God, and after putting himself under the law of God, it was no longer hupakuo, now it was hupatasso. He was going to submit himself to his parents because he put himself under the ultimate authority of God. It's a beautiful picture. A beautiful picture. You see, after a child marries, and that's after the Genesis 2 leaving and cleaving takes place, the child is no longer directly or indirectly under the authority of the parents. You see, we start with obedience, and obedience is to be a temporary teacher. From obedience, we transfer the child to submission, where the child's willing to line up under the parents. And he or she is demonstrating honor on the parents. From there, though, once we marry, obedience and submission, it's done. They take their leave. It's over with. Once a new authority structure is established with the leave and cleave, there is no longer a need for obedience. There's no longer a need for submission. But what remains is this: the honoring of the parent. You see, and that's what I said earlier. Honor will always stay. Honor will always stay. The first vehicle is obedience. We then move from obedience to submission, to hupatasso. From the time that marriage takes place and the two take their leaves, no longer needed. When children obey their parents in the early years, they are honoring their parents. When you bring your children to obedience, it's honor. When children submit to your leadership, submit to your headship, in the process, in the middle years, they are honoring their parents. And when they get married and they leave home, they are still to honor their parents. So let's talk about this mandate of honor. Because of your relationship with your parents, yours, I'm talking now to you as adults, you are either honoring your parents out of devotion, or you are honoring your parents out of duty, or you're honoring your parents someplace in between. Adult children are to always honor their parents. For some, This is going to be a very, very pleasant experience. I believe with our children this is a pleasant experience. For others, we realize it's a very difficult task. There are those who realize how precious their parents are. They see God's blessing in their life, and they realize that it is the result of the parents' diligent care and nurturing of them. The more they draw closer to God, the more they realize and grow to appreciate and love their parents, and they demonstrate that appreciation. For these parents, for these people, honoring is a joy. And that's it. Honoring is an absolute joy. It's a fulfillment. It's like when, at Christmas, when you're going to give someone a gift and you can't wait and you're excited and you know they really want it and they don't know it's coming and there's just the joy of watching them open up the gift and you have that sensation. That's what honoring is to some of you. That's what honoring is when you find the treasure now in your parents and you have the joy of honoring. Yet in contrast, there are those who have suffered under the hand of abuse. The pain of the past, the missing trust in the parents, the current lack of any meaningful relationship now has reduced the act of honoring to a duty. Yes, you're Christians and you know what the Scripture says, and it says you have to honor your father and mother, but you know there's no joy in it. For some of you, it's only a duty. I do it because I have to. I really don't want to do it. In your heart, you may say that. But you do it. And when you do it, there is no honor. There is no joy. There's no joy. There's no pleasantness. It is strictly a duty. Something that you have to do. It has become a commandment of cursing rather than a one of blessing. And yet, folks, the Bible still calls for a minimum amount of respect and honor. Regardless of how bad your life was in the past, you cannot speak evil of your parents. You cannot slander your parents. You cannot let them go hungry. You cannot ignore them in the time of need. When they're cold, you need to give them warmth. If nothing else, they are at least reduced down to your neighbor, which means you need to love them as you love yourself. What is missing, though, is the joy of honoring them. And some of you know exactly what I'm saying. You honor, but there's no joy in honor. There's no excitement. Oh, you won't speak meanly to them. You won't slander them. You won't let them go hungry. But you know your service to them, it's almost a pain. But you will still honor them. Now, I bring that up and I bring you back to your own situation and your own relationship for one reason. And it has to do with this question. What legacy are you leaving your children? What legacy are you leaving your children? You see, ultimately your parent is going to determine whether or not they will honor you with joy and out of devotion, or whether they will honor you out of duty. It's something they have to do. There is nothing more beautiful than have your children honor you, to rise up and call you blessed. There's nothing more beautiful to have your children honor you out of devotion, to have the joy on their faces of honoring you. Ladies and gentlemen, it does start with you. It absolutely starts with you. It starts with your parenting. It starts when they're very young. And it starts with your right understanding of honor your father and mother. You see, if you don't take that commandment very seriously, in the end, your children may never honor you. You see, it doesn't matter where you're at right now. It doesn't matter about where your past is. The question is where you're going to be in the future. That's what is important. Where are you going to be in the future? Are your children going to honor you with joy, or is it going to be a bitter experience for you? Do not rob your children of the joy of honoring you. Finally, I want to bring you to an understanding of the 4 phases of parenting, because I think this is so critical in understanding how to bring your children to a point of honoring their mother and father, honoring you. There are 4 phases of parenting. You know, the ultimate goal in parenting, in the human realm, ultimately is your child's friendship and the joy of them honoring you. It's your child's friendship. True friendship. True loyalty. You see, building a friendship with your child is not the starting point of your relationship. It's the relational goal. So that's where you want to end up at. The goal of your parenting, the relational goal that is your child's friendship. But it's not the starting point. It's just reverse of the secular model. It's the reverse of democratic parenting. It's the reverse of PET. It's the reverse of STEP. It's the reverse of active parenting. Your job is not to be their pals. Your job is not to be their buddies. Your job is to be their governors. Your job is to be their mommy and daddy. Your job is to be their self-control, because they do not have self-control. That's your job. The issue here is not being friendly. The issue here is being their peer and acting like their peer. You're not their peer. You're the mommy and daddy. We are called to a discipleship relationship with our children. It's bringing them from innocence and foolishness to wisdom and maturity. That's the job of a parent. That's the discipling process. And that's exactly the model the Lord gave us in John 15:15. He's in the upper room. It's the close of His ministry, and He says this: "Henceforth I call you no longer my servants," meaning disciples, "for the servant does not know what his master does. But I have called you, or I now call you my friends. For the wisdom that I have received from the Father I have passed on to you. I have made it all known to you." What a pointed illustration of passing wisdom on one to another. Jesus, when He found His band of men, He pulled them together. He brought conformity to their thinking. He brought unity to the thought process. He brought them and made them like-minded. And all through the process, as it's recorded, He was never afraid to tell them, the servant is not greater than the master. The student is not greater than the teacher. It was understood. It's a discipleship relationship. And then here in the end, He says, now my task is completed. My discipling is over. How do we know that? Because Jesus said, I have taken the wisdom from the Father, all that I have, and I have now put it into you. I have now given it to you. As a result of that, you're no longer my servants. You're no longer, in a sense, my child that needs my control. You're no longer my subject. I'm no longer your governor. Now we enter into a new relationship, one we call friendship. Why? Because we think alike now. We brought conformity. We have the moral maturity. Everything about us means compatibility. Oh, they will always be our children. In one sense, they will always be our babies. But you know, there's something very, very beautiful about the friendship. The friendship that comes through parenting. Before you get to the fourth phase, and that's the friendship phase, there's three other phases you have to go through, and let me run through them, please, and give you some ages with them. Phase number one, it's called the discipline phase. The discipline phase, birth through 5. We talk about discipline phase, this means this is the time when you're going to get control of the child. That's your job. Get control of the child so you can train the child. This is when you're going to be introducing structure to the child. There's going to be boundaries introduced to the child. Your whole job during the discipline process is get control of the child. Start the structure. Get the framework in place. Phase number 2 is called the trainer phase, and that's 6 to 12, the trainer phase. If I could borrow a sports analogy, a trainer is one who works with the athlete, not while he's in the game, but while he's on the sidelines, while, in fact, they're in practice sessions. The trainer is the one who rubs down the spiritual muscles of the person. The trainer is the one who watches the child in play and says, no, stop, let's back up, let's try it again. You see, the child is not in the game of life at this point. The child is getting ready for the game of life. And that's really the phase, the duty, between 5 or 6 and 12. And there is some overlapping in these transition phases. But between 5 and 12, your job as parents is to be like a trainer. You're going to train the child. You have control now from the discipline phase. Now we move to the training phase. Running them through the plays of life, backing them up, rubbing them down. And it's all to prepare for phase number 3, and that's the coaching phase. The coaching phase of parenting. It's 12 to 18. For some, in our case, it came in very, very early, much earlier. That is, we came to the conclusion of the coaching phase earlier because we moved into friendship earlier. The coaching phase, what is this person? In this situation, the child is in the game of life for themselves. You can call a few timeouts. You can shout plays in from the sidelines. But you know, our children are, in fact, in the game of life for themselves. They have to run the ball themselves. And when they trip and fall, they have to get up themselves. And you hope they make the right plays. You know, your confidence in the coaching phase is going to be directly related to your investment during the training phase. How well your children run the game of life during the coaching phase is directly tied to how well you train them. And you know, your training is directly tied to the discipline phase, because you could only train a child to the point that you could really control the child. And you know, in the discipline phase, you could only control the child to the point you bring them to understanding who you are as their authority, loving authority in their life. You see, the whole goal is to move them from your authority to freedom. This is what we talked about last week. You see, you want to bring them to ultimate freedom. Obedience is so temporary. Even submission is temporary. The goal is to bring the child, to make him moral on the inside, so he's principle-driven. And finally, you get to the fourth phase, and that's the friendship phase. Ladies and gentlemen, it just keeps getting better. And that's why we say to you, the teen years are the greatest years of the parent-child relationship, or at least they should be. They're marvelous years. The coaching years can just put a smile on your face. You don't have to worry about them. When you do what is right in the early years, in the discipline years, when you nurture during the training, and then you make those adjustments that need to be made during the coaching, you are preparing a child for life. You know, we only have them. Our greatest influence is the first 15 years. And then from those 15 years, they're going to probably live another 60 or 70 years. I mean, 15 years of investment. 15 years of discipling. That's what we're talking about. It is the same picture that Jesus left His disciples. The question we have to ask you is, the wisdom of the Father, have you been passing it on to your children at each one of these phases? And we do start with the structure, we do start with the discipline, we do move to the training, we do move to coaching, so that we can arrive at our goal. And our goal is friendship. I no longer call my children in the sense that they need government. I call them my friends. That's exactly what we want you to do. We want you to have them. We want you to have them.
Been another full evening of teaching, and we're going to try to wrap up some of these issues of respect for authority and parents this week, and in the next couple of weeks we'll be dealing with the other issues of property and peers and nature and elders. Mm-hmm. We'll cover all of those. But, you know, I'm thinking first of the issue of authority, Gary. I was reminded of our generation when we hit the college years. We were the first generation really that began to question authority and challenge it. And then we moved to your generation.
That's right. Our generation completely rejected authority. We saw a sign sitting there that said, "Don't walk on the grass." We'd say, that doesn't mean for us, and we'd go ahead and proceed down it. But the pendulum kind of swung over to where we just totally rejected it.
Mm-hmm. And that's pretty much where we are today. Mm-hmm. Everybody has rejected authority. And so now as parents, we want our children to learn to respect authority, and that's why we need to teach you first that there is a place for it in Scripture that we need to learn.
Well, honey, there's that bumper sticker that we see, question authority. The problem with the bumper sticker is there's a word missing. Question authority respectfully. That becomes the bottom line. Mm-hmm. We as parents undermine so often what we're trying to teach our children by our own example, by undermining authority. I think the most classic illustration is usually when a child comes home from school and maybe they got a grade they shouldn't have received, or something happened and the teacher called them in, and we only get part of the story, right. And immediately we take sides with our children. You know what I mean? And we are undermining, maybe in our spirit and in our thinking, undermining the authority that's over them. But we want them to respect us. And so there's this conflict of authority that we all have. We have to learn how to resolve our differences with authority biblically. The issue is not question authority It's question authority respectfully. The other side of the coin is, it is not a case of blind submission.
Right.
God has given us the avenue of how to approach authority and how to deal with it.
Mm-hmm. I have an example when you had talked about a teacher like that. Brittany had brought home a paper that a substitute teacher had marked what we thought was incorrect. And so I taught her that, well, we need to go to the teacher. We need to go question her and ask her if this was marked correctly. So when we got in there, the teacher had commented, well, Brittany, I'm not so sure I agree with the way the substitute marked this, but I'm going to leave it out of respect for her. So when Brittany and I left the situation, of course, my emotions were running high, and I was ready to say, how dare she say it like that? Brittany was quite upset, being a very conscientious student. And I sat there and I turned to her and I said, Brittany, we need to respect your teacher. I said, we've loved her all this time and she knows what is best in this particular situation. I said, let's trust her. But that was so hard because my emotions wanted to empathize with Brittany tremendously and turn around and say, how dare she do that? But, that's where we as parents have to really think, am I being an example of submitting to the authority set before us?
And using self-control,
Yes.
because it is, I'm sure many of you moms and dads, dads may be out on the ball field, moms more with school and those related subjects, where we almost want to take up our children's offense, and it's that protectiveness within us, I think, to want to do that, but we need to gain control also.
But there's a balance. There are times when we will do that,
Mm-hmm.
when we have to take up their offense. But we have to do it, Julie, I think by your example, we have to walk in humility, walk in integrity, but walk in humility when we go and we want to, not so much challenge authority, but we do want to respectfully question the authority, even on behalf of our children, when it's appropriate.
And I think our children need to see that we say, I don't think that is right. But at the same time, this person's been placed over us, so at this point, there's nothing more than just, showing them what we thought and see what they respond.
Our children are learning by our example. And authority crosses our path as adults every single day, and your children are looking at everything that you do. And we have to be careful how we handle the authority around us, like a policeman that might have given us a ticket,
Or your neighbor.
or a neighbor, or the presidential candidate that might be unpopular or something. We have to approach that respectfully, even though we might not agree with their position.
Mm-hmm.
We need to make sure we set the standard in the home that authority has been placed there by God.
That's right, Romans 13.
Right, and part of the reason that we need to be setting that example is, and why we've put authority and parents together, because the first authority figure that our children need to learn to respect is us as parents.
Mm-hmm.
So here we're working diligently at teaching them to respect us. But then if they see an example from us that disregards authority, as they grow, it will cross their mind, well, why do I have to respect your authority now? I don't agree with you. And the example that we've been setting is, well, if you really don't agree with authority, you don't have to respect them. So,
The parent is the first position of authority that your child is going to have to interact with. And if they don't respect the parent, how will we ever expect them to respect the authority when they go outside of the home?
I was going to say, fundamentally, we have seen over and over again, when parents come up and ask us questions at conferences or even in our parenting classes, the one thing we find, usually the starting point, is this lack of respect for mom and dad. And it shows up by the tongue, by how they demand their children, how they speak harshly. And I covered all this obviously in the lesson, but I want to bring it back to the surface because fundamentally, there is no way that you could produce a righteous child, instill biblical principles into their heart, when at the same time they're being betrayed by the attitude of communicating to mom and dad. The highest position that God has placed, and it's a worthy position. A child's life will be extended. That's how much it's the first commandment with promise.
Let me just turn the corner here. Parental authority isn't there just to set the boundaries or to be an oppressive rulership. We need to communicate to our children that your authority is there to protect them and to serve them, to really guide them through life. Of course, there is that side that does come into play, and that's the corrective side, encouraging them not to do certain things.
and that's why we really want to encourage our parents, for you to understand how high God places your value, your importance in your children's lives. I think of the scriptures that you shared this evening from Proverbs and in Exodus about the child's responsibility of how they should speak to their parents, or how they even, that eye that mocketh, I think that's that attitude, that's that look, that I'm sure many of you parents remember giving your own parents, that we need to start correcting in our own children.
And I think it can come along fairly passively. Just everything the parent asks the child to do, there's a murmur, there's a complaint, there's just a disapproval constantly. And I think parents accept that a lot of times. They accept that as, well, they didn't say no to me. They obeyed me, but it's obeyed with, the body language, or the spirit is definitely not in compliance.
Exactly. Parents too quickly are willing to accept an outward action, but not the attitude. They feel that if the child does what I ask them to do, eventually, that's good enough. And that gets back to, we have to train to the standard, we have to live to the standard, we have to correct to the standard, we have to live to the standard. And we have to bring our children to the standard. It's not enough just to get outward behavior and outward actions, because that's when you're going to end up raising a child that is moral on the outside, but not moral on the inside. It's the attitude is on the inside, the action's on the outside.
And I think parents really need to be, made aware and alert to this. Pray about it, because a lot of people are very accepting of their children rebuking them or being sarcastic to them, all in the name of, well, this child is very bright, they pick up on a lot of things. We need to be very careful as parents.
Or I want to give them the freedom to express themselves, freedom of expression, when in fact that's not freedom of expression, that's mocking God's holy word as it relates to the parent-child relationship.
And I'm sure many of you as parents are sitting there thinking, we're having all these problems in our home. Now how are we going to fix it? That will come
Yes, that's right.
in a later lesson. But right now, we want you to understand how important it is that you understand and respect authority, and that you are in the process of teaching your children how important it is to respect you. And obedience is really going to be the very first demonstration from your children of how they honor and respect you as parents.
That's right.
And that will later lead, as you said, to submission. And thinking about that too, for many of you as parents, adult children is what you are now, because we are still children, grown up. You honor your parents, but out of a sense of duty. What we want for you is, as your children mature, that they are going to have that joy in honoring you, that they don't respect you out of, well, he's my parent, she's my mother, I have to do this. We don't want you to rob your children of that joy.
You know where that's clear? That is clear when we see Julie with her parents and Eric with his parents, that there is a joy in honoring, that it's not a task that has to be done because we're Christian. It's exactly what I had shared in the session tonight, is that we have to be careful as parents not to rob our children of the future joy of honoring. And you guys do it. We see that very clearly, how you honor your parents.
Right, and I don't feel any duty. It's because of the love and relationship that has been developed for years. I feel I want to.
Yeah, we honor our parents too, so that our children will see us and how we respect our parents, so that someday they will turn back and respect us.
That's good.
It is, and
that's what brings the common ground.
It does.
3 generations, everyone honoring, everyone fulfilling their God-given role in terms of relationships.
Well, hopefully this evening, again, has been a challenge to you. There will be homework that you need to do, lesson that you need to read, and then we want you to join us back here next week as we discuss the issue of respect for elders and respect for peers.